What did late medieval knights wear underneath their plate armour? Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now, fundamentally, they wore under their armour an item of clothing called a doublet, specifically an arming doublet. Now, we've looked at those in previous videos, and I'm not going to be looking at arming doublets here. I'm going to be looking at mail. Okay, so the reason I'm covering this topic, if I have had a few conversations with people recently under videos and pictures looking at armour, where people have questioned the mail, in other words, chainmail, as it's commonly known today, the mail worn underneath plate, or not in some cases, but we'll get to that in a second. So for anyone who doesn't know, and I'm sure you all know here, this is mail. This is actually one of, I've got two, riveted mail skirts. So this is an interlinking weave of rings, riveted rings. So if we go to Asia, we might find butted rings, but in Europe, riveted. Sometimes a mixture of riveted and solid, in fact. Usually in a 4-in-1 combination. So typical European mail is either fully riveted or riveted alternated with solid rings. Almost never butted unless it's decorative, and made of iron or steel. It could in fact sometimes even be hardened steel, but usually iron or probably low carbon steel, in a mesh of 4-to-1 and very occasionally in 6-to-1. 6-to-1 was more usually in Japan, but it was occasionally done in Europe. And sometimes doubled up. So sometimes you'll get a 4-in-1 weave, but in alternate rows you'll get double rings. Anyway, we'll do a more detailed video on mail in the future. Now, underneath a full plate harness. So here we're talking about 14th, 15th and 16th centuries. There's a fundamental choice, certainly if we're talking about the late 14th century when full plate harness really starts to become common. And that is between wearing separate elements of mail or wearing full mail. So prior to the age of plate, if there is such a thing, because obviously there's a big overlap, prior to the age of plate, people were wearing mail armour predominantly. Obviously there were other types of armour around, like lamella and scale and padded gambeson and jazzeret and things like this, but fundamentally the main types of armour were mail and then plate added over the top of it. Initially with things like coated plates, and then additional things at the knees, and mostly on the legs first, and then the arms, and so on and so forth. And we'll probably do a more detailed video in the future looking at the development of plate armour in the 13th and 14th centuries. A very, very interesting subject, and in fact what I focused on in my degree at university all those years ago. But you get to a point with a full plate harness where you think, do I need to wear full mail? Do I need to wear full mail chausses on my legs? They're the sort of chainmail trousers. Do I need to wear a full hauberk on my body? That is the garment which covers your torso and arms and neck to some extent as well. Do I need to wear a full one? Or can I just have pieces of mail like this mail skirt? So by the time we get to about the year 1400, what we find is some people are just wearing bits of mail. Right, let's put that greasy mail down. Now, at this point, there are also some people still wearing full mail shirts. Now, some books out there on Arms and Armour will say, in Italy, people kept wearing full mail shirts. I'm not sure that this was particularly an Italian thing at all. In fact, we can see evidence of this in French and English and various German, various other art. And there were certainly some people right the way through the 15th century, so the 1400s, who sometimes chose to wear a full mail shirt under their plate cuirass. And in fact, this is even mentioned, particularly in the 100 Years' War. It's occasionally mentioned French knights choosing to wear a full mail shirt under their cuirass, their breastplate and backplate, and the skirt, as a specific tactical choice, as a second layer of defence. And you could kind of think of this as going heavy. However, most modern reenactors, myself included, choose instead to go for the lighter option, and that is wearing mail in specific places. Almost always in the armpits, okay, and almost always a skirt, okay. Now, there are a couple of reasons why you want it in those places, primarily above everything else. One is the minute you raise your arms, your under your armpits can't be protected by plate harness. So having mail there is really quite important, and it's a major target because it's up at the top of the upper torso. It's a major target for stabbing into with things like swords and daggers and poleaxes. So armpits are super important. Not to say that people always wore mail there, and sometimes they didn't. We can see in period art, occasionally there's no evidence of the mail being worn there, and I'll come back to this idea of heavy, medium and light in a second. Skirts are also very important, particularly when you're getting on and off horses, where the skirt, the male concertina-ring skirt, the plate concertina-ring skirt might come up, and you want some mail around there to protect your groin, obviously, but also on foot combat as well, where the groin and the butt from behind are major targets, especially if you get someone on the ground. And sometimes the male skirt also had a male, essentially like male boxer shorts underneath, and these were to protect thrusts from coming up underneath the skirt. So, additional places you might wear mail, very commonly on the inside of the elbows, which is exposed here, very commonly around the neck, sometimes known as a standard or just simply a mail collar, and sometimes down the back of the legs or at the back of the knees specifically. Now, I mentioned this idea of heavy, medium and light. Now, if we look at period art and period written sources, it's very clear that from the late 1300s onwards, there is this choice between wearing a full mail shirt and perhaps sometimes full mail legs, or just wearing bits of mail, or sometimes wearing no mail or minimal mail. So, and we can see this represented in period art as well, where sometimes there is fabric or cloth shown at the openings of the plate harness, sometimes there's mail on some of those openings, very commonly on the arms, but then not on the legs, because the legs are harder to get at than the arms. And sometimes we even see plate harness with no evidence of mail there whatsoever. So you could loosely break this down into wearing all the mail underneath your plate, or some mail, which is probably the most common category, some mail under your plate, filling the most important gaps, or at least no mail at all worn underneath the plate harness. And this was clearly done sometimes, probably most often in sporting or kind of like tournament contexts, but sometimes not. So, what are the pluses and minuses? Well, obviously, if you wear lots of mail under your plate harness, you are the most protected. But fundamentally, it's also the most fatiguing. You're carrying the most weight, you're potentially the hottest, although it doesn't make a huge heat difference. And you can also find that your movement is restricted as well. The free movement of some of the plate can be restricted. Your ability to lift your arms and climb quickly and on and off horses and stuff like this. So more weight, more restriction, and potentially more cost, although that wasn't really a problem to these people because they could obviously afford all the armour. And obviously if you don't wear the mail, you're going to be lighter, nimbler, quicker, you might be slightly lighter and have freer movement. Now, there is one other specific thing, okay, and this is a personal experience, but also experience of lots of other people I know. So those of us who own and play, essentially fight, kind of sporting combat in armour or do reenactment in armour, a lot of us and lots of people I know, myself included, one of the most uncomfortable things we wear is this, the male skirt. And it's really kind of frustrating and annoying. Now, there are ways of mitigating that. This one doesn't have a fabric or leather belt around the top. The one I normally wear does. That's packed away at the moment, so I just grabbed this one. So having a good belt system at the top, sometimes particularly bowhurt fighters actually wear this with straps which go over the shoulders, which take some of the weight of it, and they can also have the leg harness attached to that as well. As far as I know, that's not historical, but it is a way of making it more comfortable. And also this can be pointed or laced to the arming doublet or the fabric garments you wear underneath your armour. So there are ways of stopping this moving, ways of taking the weight of this and making this more comfortable. But fundamentally, this male skirt is heavier than my plate skirt. So these, despite the fact they're really important, the mail is quite heavy and kind of drags and can get snagged and can get caught and can slide down. One of the advantages of wearing a full mail shirt underneath your plate harness, despite the fact that generally speaking it's more restrictive and heavier, is that your skirt section is at least attached to it, and so it can't fall down or slide or get displaced. It's just attached to the shirt. So that is one particular specific advantage of wearing a full mail shirt underneath, is your skirt is attached to it and therefore hung off your shoulders and pulled in at your waist by your cuirass. Anyway, obviously this has been a cursory quick overview, but I suspect that a lot of you out there didn't know some of the stuff in this video. Let me know below, was any of this new to you or even useful to you? If you're in the process of putting together a modern replica set of armour for HEMA armoured fighting harness vector or reenactment or just whatever, just for kind of your own personal purposes. I personally would recommend that you go for the middle and most common of those three categories I described, and that is male voiders, male collar, male skirt. This is the one that most of us use. I have what's called a bolero section that goes around top, so it's essentially two short sleeves with my armpits that are joined by a fabric thing in the middle. That's a good way of doing it. This gives you maximum flexibility of what you wear underneath and what you wear over, but remember, when you're measuring up for your plate harness, you have to take into account the mail and the fabric that goes onto it. So don't just measure your body and then send those measurements off for very expensive plate harness, because it won't fit comfortably when you start putting mail and other things underneath it. You need to get those things first and then measure over that for your plate harness. Anyway, yeah, I hope this has been interesting and useful for some of you out there. I have been Matt Easton, I will of course continue to be, and I'll see you back on the channel very soon. Cheers folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks!